Red, Blue, and Me podcast, where we continue our conversation with SMU Financial Aid Services. Now we'll be discussing some hot topics in financial aid. So, welcome back. Thank you for joining me again, Robert.
Yeah, thank you for having me back.
So, our first question around hot topics in financial aid is if a student is considered for scholarships, what office would be able to assist that student with said scholarships?
Yeah, this is a great question because it can be different depending on the type of university a student is attending. There are financial aid offices out there that scholarship determination, eligibility, all that is decided within the financial aid office, but it is different here at SMU. So when it comes to our merit scholarships, which can consist of things like our Founders Scholarship, our Second Century Scholarship, our Provost Scholarship, those types of scholarships are determined upon admission to the university by the admission office. So they review all of the information in an admission packet, and they let us know in financial aid services what students qualify for what scholarships. And then we facilitate the awarding and disbursement of that scholarship, but we're not determining eligibility ourselves. Again, that comes to us from the admission office. So that's when a student is incoming. Now, once a student becomes a continuing student, so they're moving into their next year, scholarships primarily shift to the individual academic departments. They're determining with their funds who they want to provide scholarships to, and then just like admission during the incoming year, they send us lists and financial aid services so that we can get the funds out there and then ensure that they're dispersing appropriately. So again, when it's incoming, most of those questions about scholarships will need to go to the admission office. And then once a student becomes a continuing student and moving past their first year, then they're going to want to really speak with either their faculty advisor, their academic advisor about what opportunities exist within their academic department so they can best position themselves for those scholarship funds.
So speaking of academic department, so if a student has a scholarship and is considering changing their major, would that student be able to keep their scholarship?
Again, my favorite kind of question because the answer is it depends. So we do have certain scholarships that are tied to specific majors. So for example, we have something called the SMU Discovery Scholarship, and that is tied specifically to STEM programs. So if a student starts in a STEM major and then moves to something else, they will lose eligibility for that scholarship. So one example that we've seen in our office is a student who was majoring in math that then moved to majoring in piano. And so moving from math, which is a STEM program, to piano, which is not, they did lose eligibility for that Discovery Scholarship. Additionally, some other departmental scholarships are just that, they're departmental. So if your major, what you're moving to, is in a different department, a different academic area, then most likely you're going to lose that departmental scholarship you may have received because it won't carry over from one college to another. Now, outside of those changes in majors, the other things to be aware of when it comes to certain merit scholarships is a certain GPA needs to be maintained, as well as a certain level of enrollment. So most scholarships require a 3.0 GPA and full-time enrollment. So if at any point that GPA falls or a student enrolls in less than 12 credit hours, they will most likely lose eligibility for any scholarships they may be receiving. We can also potentially look at the current situation, so what the current year income levels are. And what we'll do is we'll collect different documents, so whether that's tax returns or pay stubs, unemployment documentation provided by the government, and we'll collect all that information, all that documentation. It'll be reviewed by a financial aid advisor to ensure we have everything that we need. As long as we do, then that information will be presented to an appeals committee for review, and based on their review, they'll determine what changes we might be able to make to the FAFSA and to the CSS profile to account more for what a family's current financial outlook looks like. Because again, we do understand things can be different. Now, I will say when it comes to special circumstances, it's never a guarantee that we'll be able to offer more money, but it is the option we have for seeing what we can do, again, to look at a student and family situation more accurately than maybe what the FAFSA profile initially shows us upon submission.
If a student does have special circumstances and needs to submit an appeal, how long would it take for them to receive a decision back?
Yeah, so that somewhat depends on what the situation is. So, using the example of a loss of income, we would again reach out and let the student know what documentation we need. There's actually a form that we would provide the student that walks them through the different situations we typically consider and then tells them what documents they need to provide. And so, there will be an initial review by the financial aid advisor to just determine, do we have everything we need? If we don't, we'll reach back out to the student, to the parent to collect everything. But once we have a complete file and can present that to the committee does meet weekly to make those decisions. They do have the right to ask for more information or clarification if they need it. But as long as we have everything we need when we submit that to the appeals committee, typically a decision takes about 1 to 2 weeks. And then we will let the student know what the outcome is. We'll then make whatever changes that were determined by the committee and determine what effects that might have on the financial aid and what changes we may be able to make. So to answer the question just more directly, about 1 to 2 weeks typically for when we have a complete application, a complete file that we can present to the appeals committee.
Well, thank you, Robert, for giving us those hot topics in financial aid. And thank you, Mustangs and parents, for listening to this episode of Red, Blue, and You. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go Mustangs.